Welcome everyone to the Newly podcast. My guest today is Jonathan Ewing. The Newly podcast is where you get no BS insights on how to grow yourself and grow your career. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jonathan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a VP level client strategist, mostly dedicated to biz dev. I work for AppCo Worldwide, which is a full service comms consultancy with about 1,000 people. We've got all sorts of services like media, marketing, government relations, advocacy, and we work in all kinds of verticals like health, DEI, financial services, and more.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. So the theme of our show is knowing how to merge skills and to be able to grow your career. And I just wanted to start a little bit about talking a little bit about understanding what your career journey is. So give me sort of a brief synopsis of your here to there. What has your journey been until now?
Yeah, I started in digital back when that meant giving the interns the keys to the social media and coming back in a couple weeks and seeing what they did with it. And have been in this space over 10, 15 years and have watched what was once referred to as digital just become the only thing that we do. My parents didn't love that I spent so much time on the computer growing up instead of doing homework, but look, Ma, it got me a career.
Right, there you go. Oregon Trail paid off.
Yeah, I didn't get dysentery along the way.
That's so great. That's so great. I love your point about how much digital has changed. You know, how it started off where it was a VP being like, I guess we should probably do that. You know, let's give it to the interns. Whereas now, like, if you start any sort of marketing campaign and you don't have a digital strategy, you're dead in the water. So talk a little bit more about that and your experience with that.
It's like I've spent my entire career, I think once I've reported to somebody who's done my job before. And that puts you in a really interesting spot, right? Where there's an emerging technology, people hire for that emerging technology, and the people who are managing it don't do it. And it puts you in a really interesting position because you're at the start of it. And so eventually you will be the person in charge of other people who are doing it because you've done it before. And that's just so important to find people like that who are your who are your managers, who are your leaders and your mentors, and to realize that if you're going through this situation where you're doing something that is new and different in the industry and reporting to people who've done it a different way, that this is a struggle right now, but it will pay off later.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that in previous jobs where there's a sort of a disconnect between communicating with leadership about the importance of this strategy in creating an inbound funnel or inbound lead funnel versus I don't know, direct mail or some of the more extremely traditional methods. And it's just so interesting. How have you navigated that type of communication as you've sort of grown up in this age of needing to put digital at the forefront?
Not well. I made a lot of mistakes early on. You just like when you see it. So you're talking about we could classify what you just said as like demand gen versus lead gen, right?
Yeah.
And when you see the vision, and other people don't, it's just frustrating, and your early career, and you're right, and you're trying to figure it out, and you're trying to figure out how to demonstrate it, you're gonna not explain it well. And I think that if this is your path, right, if you're in a new space, right, if demand gen is your thing, or if you're in, I don't know, any one of the AI industries that's coming up, your job is to explain what you do, and increasingly as you progress, the job is about explaining it versus doing it. And if you're a doer, you find situations where you can have somebody who's really good at explaining be your partner. And if you're good at explaining, it's a great fast track to leadership. But you've just got to figure out how to translate what you do well And until you do that, you will be frustrated.
That is such a great point, that really a primary part of your job is explaining what you do, explaining the value that you're adding, and how that works. How have you done that? How have you been able to kind of elevator pitch yourself in certain ways to be able to show the value that you're bringing to an organization?
Spent most of my career in agencies, and that just gives you a lot of at bats, right? I mean, instead of having one person who you report to, just constantly working on trying to figure out how to get through to them, you do it every week, and you've got new clients because they turn over, or you're on new accounts or whatever, and it's just if you want to get good at anything, you got to do it a lot, you start with friends, family, colleagues, and eventually you get put in positions where you're pitching, business, and I mean, especially in that environment, which is, where I spend most of my time right now, you win on your ability to show a vision and to get buy-in for that vision.
Absolutely, absolutely. The buy-in is so key. And so, what would you tell somebody who is struggling to get buy-in for, let's say, a new strategy that they're trying to put forward, with either senior leadership or a client if they work at an agency?
Yeah. Figure out what they care about, figure out what they're scored on, and figure out what their boss scores them on. It's all about
Mhm.
incentives. It's all about how structures work within organizations. If you don't have a good sense of what your client's internal political challenges are, it's going to be very hard to figure out how to get them bought into something. Sometimes it's just entirely not what you think, right? And this goes beyond like, revenue, right?
Yeah.
This is like, like what do you imagine might happen in a conversation between your client and her boss, annually, right? I mean, like,
Mhm.
what do you think that is going to be about? And this is awkward, right? It's awkward to ask people in power, people in control of your budgets, what they are compensated on, right? Like what their jobs depend on. But if you can figure out how to tactfully, just straightforwardly ask the question,
Mhm.
to get at what they're scored on inside their organizations. They treat you like a business partner, not a vendor. It just totally transforms the relationship that you have with them.
Wow, that's so interesting. Developing that level of sort of intimacy with them allows you a
Yeah.
level of buy-in that goes beyond a vendor relationship. It's such an interesting thought, and I just really appreciate that. So, I mean, you've had a fairly non-traditional path to marketing, and I know there's a lot of people out there that are either looking to pivot to a different career, or maybe they're newly laid off. Just talk a little bit about what skills you've developed. And I mean, you've talked a little bit about relationship development skills as we've been, mentioning some of these things, but what skills have you developed, and did you develop in your younger years, that are paying off and continue to pay off now?
Mm. Um, I know that there's a lot of pressure to niche down, right?
Mhm.
I think you, Britta, shared, sort of the struggle with niching this podcast, right? And I
Yes.
think that what's the most important is to get reps in before you niche, right? I
Mhm.
mean, you can dig deep into one area and then come out of it in a few years and realize that this isn't what you want to be doing, and that's just like awful, right? I found that being an agency has given me just this broad perspective from B2B to sometimes B2C to being in advocacy and commercial and corporate, and just so many different avenues have allowed me to get into a lot of things and figure out what I want and what I'm good at. And right now that's business development, right? And
Mhm.
it's a great position to be if you're a strategist, right? It's a great position to be if you have a lot of things that you're good at, because you get a lot of at bats, and that's just a good moment for you to continue to develop that ability. But I think that there's this constant tension throughout my career, and I'm sure throughout a lot of people's careers, of how broad do I want to go, how niche do I
Mhm.
want to go. I spent a lot of time in healthcare specifically, right? Like that was an interesting moment, just to feel what I could discover in a niche. And I think that's the first step in a career search, is understanding like how broad am I going to go with this.
So what area do you feel like you have flourished in? You talked about B2B, B2C, having a lot of those at bats at agencies. What area have you felt like, oh yeah, this is it. I know that this is it. And how did you know? Well, yeah.
I got an ad on LinkedIn this morning for the National Peanut Board. It's a trade association of peanut growers, and they have problems like airlines banning peanuts on planes and other agricultural things. And this one this morning was about the WIC program and trying to ensure that people in Washington wouldn't prevent peanuts from being eligible for WIC reimbursement.
Oh, fascinating. Wow.
This is the kind of thing that just lights me up.
I love it.
Just the wonkiest possible thing is just the most interesting thing. I don't know where people go. The I guess the benefit of being an agency is you get to play with these things, just find and discover awesomeness in there. I have another client who's B2B to B2C. Which is and they're in like a distributor situation, so no one knows them, but they're just like solid returns. It just lights me up to be in these like weird situations. So I don't know. I found myself very much now in the business of selling marketing services, and this is different than sales, right? Sales is different than new business or business development or however you want to put it, right? Sales is like, hey, we're going to sell you this thing and then pass you off to an AE. And the salesperson has nothing to do with that in an ongoing way. But the journey in business development is that you remain tied to it because you're selling yourself, really, like you're selling your own stuff, and that's a totally different game. So I've appreciated a lot of sales resources just to sort of familiarize myself with the space and best practices. But I don't know, that's the niche that I've ended up in now.
That's so fascinating. I think what's so interesting is I'm just seeing that you really love problem solving. That if there's a weird puzzle, you're like, I'm in. Let's do this.
Yeah, peanuts.
That's a great skill. That's a great skill to develop. Peanuts. Yeah, let's do it. So a question I have for you specifically is, relationships and business development, a lot of people say that it's just about, like, as you've said, hits at bat, or throw as many darts at the wall as you possibly can, and that's more of a tactical approach. And then yet others say really it's about developing and fostering relationship. What would you say to that?
I was just talking with somebody who got laid off and is in a sales role. Long time sales, has sold me stuff before. Very, very great guy, right? He's got a book that is impossibly large to network with, right? If he, took everybody who is important to him to network with, to lunch every single day and had 30-minute phone conversations with everybody else throughout the week. I mean, it would take him like 6 months to be able to get through his book, and he would have to start the whole thing over again. It's just too many people, right? And so your former boss talks about relationships at scale, and I think that's a really important way to think about business development. Is that there's only so many events that you can go to. There's only so many individual conversations that you can have. That if you look at business development like a sales type engagement, which is to say one-to-one, you can't possibly nurture your entire network. You need to approach it like a marketing type approach, which is one-to-many. LinkedIn's a great way to do that. Podcast is a great way to do that. Whatever it is, how do you get touch points with the people who matter to you in a sustainable one-to-many way, so that in between, when you have the one-to-one conversations with them, that you're still staying top of mind.
I love that. Getting touch points. Say that again. How do you get touch points with your one-to-many? Oh man, I'm butchering it.
I already forgot. I suppose the idea is like, you can have lots of one-to-one conversations, but you will never reach everybody who matters to you one-to-one. That in between the one-to-ones, you have to have one-to-many opportunities.
It's so relevant what you're saying about developing those one-to-many opportunities. And I think also too, not just relevant in terms of like business development, but if you're laid off, like, post every day. That's your one-to-many touch point, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I know people sometimes poo-poo the idea of, posting every day, and I'm not a social media influencer. Yeah, but you give a future employer a chance to get to know you with every post that you make. So
Yeah.
maybe don't post about your dog every day, but post about things that are relevant to your career development. What would you say to somebody
Yeah.
that's just been laid off and is like, well, how do I do this thing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think one, don't expect to go viral, right? I think that there's this like, okay, well, I guess all these laid off posts are doing really well, so I'm going to make one, and a
Mhm.
lot of people walk into that expectation of like, well, like I guess if this is good for me and I have to do it, then I'm going to do it, and then it flops, and then you're like, oh, why did I even do this in the first place? It's like, let's manage expectations here, right? Like the goal is to get in front of your network, right? I
Mhm.
mean, sure, there's an ancillary benefit of there being organic reach, but that's like it's a pipe dream when you're starting out, right? When it's your first post, you dust it off the LinkedIn in 6 months, and suddenly you're spending time here and trying to figure out how to make it work. It's just like, talk about the things that talk about it often, talk about it from hopefully a humble perspective, and talk about it
Mhm.
regularly. The goal is to be in front of the people who could decide your fate with things that they find interesting. And you could look at it this way, right? It is like your job is to show them that you understand their problem better than they do. And if you look at
Ooh,
it with that like nugget, right, and you're constantly showing up with that kind of information, then it may or may not pay off for you. It may
yeah.
never get you a job. It may never bring in business for you. It may never, do the things that you expect it to do. But my goodness, at least you're going to be like doing something productive, honing what you think and how you think. And there are so many ancillary benefits for figuring out how to create content about the things that you know.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about your job is to show them that you understand their problems better than they do.
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant way to look at it, to think about, okay, what job do I want? What are the problems or puzzles or issues that come with that job? And how can I aim my posts at talking about my approach to solving a B2B issue or a relationship development if I'm wanting to be in customer success or what have you. I think that's such a wonderful approach. And it's not necessarily niching down, but it's definitely targeted and just a little bit of a smarter approach.
Yeah, it's a great way to make a career pivot too, right? I mean, like,
Ooh,
you're in
okay.
one job, right? And you'd like to be in another job. How do you demonstrate that you're able to take on a different job, right? You can take courses. Like, that's great. I'm not poo-pooing courses, right? But there's
Mhm.
also like beginning to develop thoughts around that new opportunity, right? And figuring out how to translate your skills into that. You see this a lot with transitioning teachers, right? Who are
Ooh, yeah.
there are these jobs out there that are like so essential, so important, but that they're just like niche, right? Like you just get
Mhm.
stuck being a nurse, being a teacher, being in some of these roles. And it's like, well, actually, you're really good at multitasking and problem
Mhm.
solving, and you're
Mhm.
really good at talking with parents who are the buyers of your services, who have lots of complaints, and I mean, there's just like so many avenues, right, to
Yeah.
translate this into success, into sales, into whatever, right?
Absolutely. And so kind of in that same vein, I love that you're mentioning people that are pivoting. It seems like nowadays when I have approached people that are wanting to make a pivot or are unsure about making a pivot, they kind of have this idea that, well, I need to have X skill set before I can even approach it, or I don't have X degree. What would you say to someone who is trying to make their way into this emerging career landscape and they don't have an extra, a marketing degree, or they don't have a whatever degree or skill set to be able to stand on?
Yeah, I think skill set and degree are very different. I think that I
Ooh,
think
good
that
point.
we've started to think a lot differently as an industry about the value of degrees, right?
Mhm, mhm.
If nothing else, that there are very important people talking about how degrees are less important to them. And if you have a substantial amount of career experience, particularly in the same space that you're looking to translate it into, it doesn't seem like degree is something that holds you back. It may be, particularly if you're going into an area that I don't know cares about that. But if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably not something that's terribly relevant in your industry, right? I think that skill set is different, and skill set is really important, and you have the opportunity to educate, to translate, or to be in a brand new role where you can develop that, and that's important. But the days of having to have an employer pay you a W-2 for 40 hours a week to be able to learn a skill set are kind of over. You can develop whatever skill set you want. And it's about figuring out how to navigate that and grow that, and even freelance that. I don't know, it's just so many opportunities.
There are so many opportunities. And what I think, to expound on that, I think we talked about this in a different conversation we had, but maybe as a teacher, you have a really different perspective to bring to business development that could totally change and light up a specific, business strategy in a way that maybe nobody else has who's been traditionally trained in sales or business development. Maybe your skills as a nurse make you uniquely able to do client success because you can handle really difficult customers, or something like that. But just not to doubt yourself and find ways to translate those. How have you done that? I think you talked to me about how you sort of combined your was it a politics degree? What were the 2 degrees that you had? You kind of just you're like, I'm gonna make this up as I go.
No, it's just 1 degree. It's political communication. It's the most
Okay.
DC possible degree, and I feel like I've had a pretty linear path from a subject matter perspective, but a very interesting path from a like how do I say this right? Like I've been working for peanut people my entire career, but it's been like what I've done for them that's changed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. You've been working for the peanut people. I mean, not literally, but that's such a great analogy.
They put a picture of the CEO on the ad, right? And I just kept seeing him with a monocle and a cane. I just wanted to call him
Oh,
Mr. P. Anyway, sorry, this is terrible. I hope he's not
I'm
listening.
gonna go on again. Oh, so great. So how have you benefited from being just flexible about your approach to your career, your approach to using the skills that you've acquired, and to attaining new skills?
Yeah. If you're in a big shop, you're expected to do one thing. If you're in smaller shops, you're expected to do a lot of things. And there's always going to be this pressure for flexibility, right? I mean, like
Mhm,
if you're at a company, there's 1,000 people in my company, and I still feel like there's ample opportunity to flex and do random, different, awesome things.
mhm,
I feel like if I were in 100,000 person company, it would be different. But in my size, and this is most businesses out there, right, are small enough for you to have flexibility to do different things. Sometimes it's expected of you, and sometimes you want to do things, but it's just about um, taking the opportunities and making the opportunities for yourself, right? You want to be clear with leadership about the things that you want to grow into, and find ways to be able to get closer to those things, and that's the way to acquire different skills.
I appreciate that point about being clear with leadership about the things that you want to grow into. I know I've been guilty of this historically, of really sort of expecting them to see the skills that I'm putting forward and expecting them to sort of infer that, oh, she would be good in X position, or she would be good, we can give her more leadership in X thing, without
Yeah.
really articulating that. And I think that that's been a big downfall of mine historically.
Oh man, like pick yourself, right? Like don't wait to get picked for something. Like
Mhm,
it's just not going to happen, right? Like
mhm,
you think that you've done a great job and your boss, will promote you. Ask for the promotion. Maybe your boss doesn't know that, right? Like you think that you want to grow into this thing, and you feel like you've been clear. I don't know. It's just like good communication. This is about relationships, right? It's just like
mhm.
clear communication with people. And particularly if you're trying to pivot, like back to the nurse thing, right? Like there's like not a single person who's going to be hiring for, I don't know, success, who's going to look at a nurse application and be like, oh, this is a great fit, right? Like it's your job to tell them. It's your job to explain to them what the bridge is, right? Like you might think it's obvious. They probably don't. And so paint the picture for them.
Absolutely. And I think, if at least for me, I've made a couple of career pivots when I've struggled understanding how to translate those things and to explain those to a hiring manager or what have you. I've gone directly to the source. So I've asked for a meeting with somebody who is in, marketing, or in customer success, or in, account management, and learn from them what are sort of the boots on the ground skill sets that they use every day, and then ask them, like, how do you think my XYZ experience would translate to your position? And it gives you an idea of how to maybe help that transition, help yourself explain in that way.
Totally. Particularly within companies, right? Like people are willing to talk to you. You just have to ask them for it. You know?
Exactly. Exactly. I love your point about communication, and people are willing. There's so many more people willing to help you and talk to you than you could ever than you wouldn't think. At least,
Yeah.
have you experienced that?
It's like um, anytime there's something obvious but people don't do it, it just like begs you to question why that is, right? Like,
Mm,
why do people not communicate? Why do people not ask for the meeting? Why do people not reach out to people in the network? Why do people not talk about their unemployment on LinkedIn? Why do people not create content about their niche? And I think that it comes down to vulnerability. I think it comes down to feeling like there's an exposure there. It's like, what will people think of me? Will this person be willing to take their time to talk with me? There's this feeling of like, what if I get hurt from
mm,
doing this? That's real. And I think it's like important to identify, like, if it's that or if it's something else, but particularly if it's that, right? To just like sit with that feeling of like,
mm,
okay, like, if I do this, it could hurt.
mhm.
And just like take it out of the emotional brain and like stick it in the rational brain, and like sit with it.
Yeah. I love the idea of sitting with it and sort of talking yourself through it. It reminds me, I don't know why this is probably a weird analogy, but I feel like you'll roll with it. It reminds me of like when you're a little kid and you're about to rip off a Band-Aid and you're like, okay, this is gonna hurt. And you're like prepping yourself, you're like hyping
Yeah.
yourself up, and then you do it, and usually, ripping off a Band-Aid, it's not as bad as you expect it to be, honestly.
Yeah. And like, hopefully you don't have too many band-aids to rip off, but hopefully you do get a lot of reps at being vulnerable. Hopefully you do get a lot of reps at open and clear communication, right? And if you
Mhm.
look back through your career and you're like, wow, I didn't like advocate for myself very much, or I didn't, take advantage of talking to people who were really awesome around me, who I wanted to get meetings with, because I hoped that they would pick me and stop by my desk and, put time on my calendar. And instead I should have just put time on their calendar. It's just like, I don't know, like, vulnerability is hard. And
Yes.
yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I like to close up our time with just a couple of rapid fire questions. And first, before we go into those, I just want to say this has been such a great conversation, and I just so appreciate you sharing your experience. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
And I'd love to have you on the show again at some point if you want to join.
for
Um,
sure.
yeah. So starting with the first rapid fire question, what is the most random job that you've ever had? It could also, I would say, maybe also account, if since you did spend all. I mean, maybe
uh,
name the name of the
yeah,
company,
wow.
but
Yeah, I can't go on record for the weirdest accounts, although that's been a
of
fascinating
course.
thing.
Mhm.
I think the most random job I had was in high school and into college. I was an area manager for a graduation photography company, and so I'd lead like teams of 6 people with like a backseat full of photo gear, and set up at these graduations and just like rapid fire everybody who came down the line, shook the hand, and like at the second the hands touched, you captured the photo and sent it back to headquarters in Kansas. And like made me feel very important as a 18-year-old.
That sounds like a cool job, like
It was
being a part
fun.
of such a celebratory moment. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I still dream of that awful graduation song that I heard hundreds of times.
oh my God, in your nightmares. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Never-ending graduation. I love that. Okay, so lastly, what is the worst career advice that you have ever gotten?
Ooh. Uh, I think paying your dues is a just like really toxic way to approach organizational dynamics.
Mm,
And I think people get that. I don't think people say pay your dues anymore, but there's a lot of like subtle nods to paying your dues of like when I was in this position, or you just have to wait for this, or just like some sort of thing to slow your roll, right? And if
Mhm.
you're ambitious and you care and you want to grow, and you bump up against these ceilings repeatedly, then it's sort of an indication that this might not be the place for you, right? Paying your dues is this idea that you would take a linear vertical path through your career. And if you talk to, if you, I don't know, I just feel like most people haven't done that, right? Like
Mhm.
the happiest, most successful people who I've met have had pretty remarkably random experiences, right? And have like pursued the thing that they care about. And this is kind of like I don't know. This is just like chutes and ladders for your career, right? Like the best way to go up is to take the ladder that is in a diagonal direction, a couple floors, versus trying to battle your way, one level at a time vertically. It's just like
Mhm.
it's not as rewarding. It's not as easy, and unless you have like leadership who see your value the same things that you value in you, and what like unless they've picked you, which is like an exception in career world, then
Mhm.
you have to pick yourself, and picking yourself means going diagonally instead of vertically.
I love the analogy of the chutes and ladders. I think you discovered $1 million idea. Make your own business chutes and ladders. Like a
B2B shoots and ladders.
yeah, so
Lead
great.
gen sets you back to the ground floor.
Oh, love it, love it. Well, thank you for joining me, Jonathan Ewing, and hope to talk to you again soon. And I hope you have a great day.
This is fun, Britta. You too.